Baruch Hashem. So this week is Parashas Yisro, and I'd like to talk today about basically go into depth into an essay of the Dudaei Reuven about the nature of the oral law. The Dudaei Reuven of Rabbi Reuven Katz, former chief rabbi of Petach Tikva, of blessed memory. And so I've been studying him lately. And he has a beautiful essay about the power of the oral law, the uniqueness of the oral law, and how it relates to making the Jewish people, giving us our special mission, our special tradition. So first I want to start by reading the pasuk that's going to be the biggest part of his discussion, and it comes a pasuk that precedes the Ten Commandments. In chapter 19, let's go to chapter 19, verse 1. It says, in the third month, the third month after the children of Israel left Egypt, Bayom Hazan, that day they came to the Sinai wilderness. They traveled from Refidim, Midbar Sinai, Midbar, camped in the wilderness, and the Jewish people camped at the opposite Mount Sinai. And Rashi says, they were finally unified. This will be relevant to the Dudaei Reuven's message, that all the other times they camped, there was disputes. But this time, when they were about to receive the Torah for the first time, there was unity. Moshe went up to God. This was on the second day of the month. All the times Moshe went up, it was in the morning. That's why we see from here that the morning is the best time to have an aliyah, to go up and to start your day early in the morning. God called out to Moses from the mountain, saying, This is how God called out. Kotamar, he said, God called out and he said, this is what you should say. This is the language that you should use. This is the language you shall use. Kotomar Beit Yaakov. This is how you shall speak to the Beit Yaakov, the house of Jacob. V'tagedu v'nei Yisrael. And thus you shall say to the sons of Israel. Rashi says, Kotomar, thus you shall speak, or thus you shall say, is an expression, the word amirah is an expression of softness. Speak to the Beit Yaakov. Rashi says this refers to the women. To the women you shall speak in a soft tone, but to the V'tagedu of Israel, and when it comes to the children of Israel, the sons of Israel, the rest, i.e. the men, then you speak to them in a harsh manner. Varim hakashim kigidin, like that's hard like a sinew. You ever try to eat like a tendon? It's too hard to eat. They're very hard. So when it comes to the men, you have to tell them the punishments and speak harshly and warn them. But when it comes to trying to teach the Torah to the women, she said you have to say it in a soft manner, in a manner that's softer and more accessible. So in that context, we're going to have a look at what the Dudaei Reuven says. The Dudaei Reuven is a very long essay here. We're not going to be able to read the whole thing, but he has a very nuanced approach to the oral law. So we're going to see what he says about these verses. So it says Moshe went up to the mountain and God called him from the mountain. He quotes the verses that we just said. And actually he does, let me do before we go into the Dudaei Reuven, let's do a couple more verses from the Torah, which the Dudaei Reuven also comments on. It says in chapter 19, verse 4, you have seen that which I did to Egypt. You saw what I did to Egypt. Rashi says it's not a tradition. You saw with your own eyes. V'ayasatchem al kamfei nisharim, and I'll carry you. Usually this is translated on the wings of eagles. Nisharim could be a vulture, but most usually it's translated as eagles. Va'aviyatchem elai, and I'll bring you to me. If you listen to my voice, ushmartem et briti, and you guard my covenant, v'yitem li sigula, and you'll be a segula, a treasure from all the nations, mikol amim kiliko haaretz, because the whole world is mine. Atem tiyuli, and you shall be for me a mamlechet kohanim. You'll be a kingdom of priests, the goy kadosh, and a holy nation. These are the words which you shall speak to the children of Israel. So, hold on one second. Okay, so in that context, the Dudaei Reuven, what his approach is usually is to quote many of the midrashim on it, on these verses. In general, that's how he begins his essays. They quote usually 3 or 4 midrashim, and then to raise certain questions about how do you understand them, and then to weave them together into a message that's appropriate not only for his time but also for our time. And so the first one he cites is the Mechalta states at the end. It says, "These are the dvarim; these are the words that you shall speak to the children of Israel. Shelo tifchot v'lo tosif. You shall not add." Excuse me. You shall not say less than these words, and you shall not add on. That you shall speak to the children of Israel in this order. Beseder azeh. And so the Dudaei Reuven says, well, what's the intent here? What does it mean? He says, speak them in this order. God told him already, speak them in this order. What does it mean? Do not add on and do not diminish. And also, he says, the verse itself, you shall be for me a kingdom of priests. So he says that verse, if we look at it closely, it's also challenging. It says, the verse could have said, if you look at verse 5 closely, chapter 19, verse 5 and 6, it says, if you listen to my voice and you guard my commandment, and then you will also be Mamlechet Kohanim, the Goy Kadosh. Why does it have to add in the words Va'atem tiyuli, you will be for me? Those words seemingly are extra, they're unnecessary. What are they coming to include? And also, he's going backwards. The third question that he asks is, why does it begin with the words, thus you shall say to the house of Jacob and speak to the children of Israel? And then at the end, he says, these are the words that you shall speak to the children of Israel. What happened to the house of Jacob at the end? The first verse we started was, thus you shall speak to Beit Yaakov, v'ko tagid l'vnei Yisrael. But now at the end, it says, thus you shall speak to the children of Israel. And he forgot about Beit Yaakov at the end. Not forgot, obviously, the Torah doesn't forget about anything, but all of a sudden, Beit Yaakov drops out. And then he has one more question. But he cites the midrash that I cited from Rashi, but he expands the midrash. It says the Beit Yaakov, that refers to the women, and the children of Israel, this refers to the men. And then the midrash says something that's very powerful. It says, why does it say you shall first teach the women? If you look at the verse says, thus you shall teach to the house of Jacob and speak to the children of Israel. So the house of Jacob is the women. So the question is, why are the women mentioned first? Well, hold on one second. I just want to pull my name. Why in the verse? Why is it so important to speak to the women before the men? Lama nashim tchila. So it says the midrash because it's so important for them to raise their children in the path of Torah. So says God, when I created the world, I only created Adam, and afterwards I created Chava, and 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 all this trouble came to the world. Now, if I don't call the women first, they're going to cancel the Torah. God learned from his mistake. When he created Adam, he started with Adam, and then Eve caused problems. So now that he's giving the Torah, he says, I'm going to start with the women. Otherwise, if you don't go to the women first, you're going to have problems. Therefore, it says, thus you shall say to the house of Jacob. First say, the beginning of the first speak to them the words that they can hear. And then speak to the children of Israel, to the men. And more lahem, speak to them in a manner that they could hear. Rabbi Yochanan gave a different explanation. What does it say? Thus he shall speak to the house of Jacob. It doesn't refer to the women, but that refers to the Sanhedrin. As it says, house of Jacob, go, and we let us go, and we will walk in the path of, in the light of God. Then he quotes one more Gemara. And this is the Gemara in Shabbos 87a. This is where the Gemara in Shabbos 87a has an extended discussion on what happened at Sinai. 87a, 87. There's an extended discussion. It goes into 88 also. So God said to Moshe, go to the people and tell them to go and sanctify themselves. That's going to be, where's that verse? That's chapter 19, verse 10. God said to Moshe, go to the people, v'kidashtem hayom u'machar, sanctify them today and the next day, and wash their garment. And the Gemara Shabbos says, 3 things that Moses did on his own, without God telling him, and God agreed with him. One is, he added 1 day on his own. Because God said, go to the people and sanctify today and tomorrow. And Moses said that that's not enough. Moses says that's not enough. Not enough. He made a drasha. He expounded the verse. He said, today and tomorrow, today like tomorrow. Just like tomorrow has a night with it, also today has a night with it. And so he said it means 2 days aside from today. So God said, separate, tell everybody, the husbands and wives have to separate for 2 days before Sinai, but Moshe added on a 3rd day, on his own. On his own! He added on a 3rd day. And how do we know, says the Gemara, that God agreed with him? Because God, the divine presence did not come until Shabbat morning. And that's what the Talmud says. So Talmud is saying something incredible, that God said separate, husbands and wives need to separate for 2 days. Comes along Moshe and he says 3 days. And so what's going on here? So Dudaei Reuven asks, this is very difficult. Since Moses says today like tomorrow, doesn't that mean that that's what God had in mind? So why does the Talmud say that he did this on his own and God agreed with him? If this was not what God wanted, why didn't God say this from the beginning? If this was not, why did God not say from the beginning, separate for 3 days? Why only 2 days? And so, meaning to say, it's a tremendous question. What does it mean? If God wanted him to separate for 3 days, he should have said so. What does it mean Moshe did this on his own and God said he's right? So this is the Dudaei Reuven calls this is a tremendous question, the size of a river. It's like a huge question, the size of a river. Anyway, then the Gemara, then he has another question. He keeps going here. He says, Rav Yosef, on the day of Shavuos, said, prepare for me. Today we have the custom to eat dairy on Shavuos, but in those days, he said, prepare for me a very nice calf. He calls it an igla talta. And he says, if we're not for that day, that i.e. Shavuot, where the Torah was given, there would be many Yosefs in the marketplace. So what does it mean? What was that day that was caused? What was it? The day didn't cause the giving of the Torah. So he wants to know, what is Rabbi Yosef going to? So then he says another question. Rabbi Eliezer said, and this comes from also from Shabbos. He's going through the Gemaras in Shabbos. On the day that the Jewish people said the two famous words, we will do and we will listen. In Hebrew, Naaseh v'nishma. They did, we will do, and only afterwards they will listen. Heavenly voice went out from the heavens, and it said, who revealed this secret that the angels use? Because it says, blessed Hashem blessed angels, the mighty warriors who do his word, to listen to his word. At first it says the angels do, and only afterwards do they listen. So why, he says, is this phrase, Naaseh v'nishma, a big secret? So Rashi says in his commentary to Mishpatim, chapter 24, that the Naaseh is the Sefer HaBrit, the book of the covenant, from Bereshit until the giving of the Torah. And if that's the case, it's on the past, and the Nishma is on the future. So why is it a secret? Okay, two more Gemaros, and then he's going to start tying them together. So two more Gemaros. One is the Gemara in Gittin, 60a. The Gemara in Gittin, 60a, says as follows. Says Rabbi Yochanan, God did not make a covenant with, the only reason, and this is actually where he's starting to tie it together. This is where it all really starts to come together. This is the crux of it. The source of the covenant between God and the Jewish people was only over the oral Torah. The oral Torah, as it states, because on the basis of these words, I made a covenant with you and with Israel. Exodus 34. And the Dudaei Reuven says, what does this mean? It says in Parashas Kisisa, God said to Moshe, write down these words, because on these words I'm making a covenant. And that's referring to the written Torah. So why does the text in the Talmud say the covenant was over the oral law? Why is the Talmud saying that? So that's the basic question. Why is the covenant between God and Jewish people centered, according to the Talmud, around the oral law? And now he quotes the text, which is probably the most cited text about when the Jewish people stood at Sinai. It says they stood underneath the mountain. And so this teaches us that God held the mountain over their heads like a barrel, and he said to them, and he said, if you accept the Torah, good, and if not, this will be your grave. And so, and he says, and it says there, it says there will be your grave, and it should be really saying here will be your grave. So that's a big question. And also, if they already said Naaseh v'nishma at that point, before Sinai, they said we will do, why is God now threatening them again? They've already accepted the Torah. Why is God holding this over their head? So the Midrash comes along and says there are two things. Earlier, they had accepted the written Torah. But now, when they said these words, Naaseh v'nishma, that was over all the commandments of the written Torah. But now, when God was holding the mountain over their heads, this was on the oral Torah. For the written Torah, they did not need the mountain to be held over their heads. But they didn't want to accept the oral Torah. And about this, it was required to hold the mountain over their heads. So now we're coming to the crux of the matter. And the matter is the power of the oral law. And if you really want to focus on it, this is the distinction between the different denominations of Judaism, the different streams. Do you accept the oral law as binding? Do you accept the oral law as binding? Do you accept the Masorah, the tradition? Or do we say, listen, we can make it up for ourselves as we go along? That's really the key differentiator between the Torah true Judaism and the Judaism that's not attached to the Torah is the relationship with the oral law. Do we accept the oral law upon ourselves as binding? And says the Dudaei Reuven, really, the written Torah without the oral Torah is really impossible to keep. Because, like, for example, it says in the Shema that you should wear the tefillin and it'll be for you as totafot. We have no idea what that would mean, except for the oral law. We have no idea what even the tefillin would look like, except for the oral law. We have no idea when it says that you should take for yourself on the holiday of Sukkot a pre-Eitz Hadar, a beautiful fruit of a tree. We have no what it would be. In fact, the mitzvah of circumcision, the mitzvah of a brit milah, where we only know this on the basis of the oral law. Otherwise, we wouldn't know where it should be. In fact, the Talmud in Shabbos 31b tells us that was a person came before Shammai, and he said to him, how many Torahs are there? How many Torahs? And Shammai said 2, a written Torah and an oral Torah. He said, so he says to Shammai, listen, I'll accept the written Torah, but the oral Torah, I don't accept. Convert me on the condition that you shall teach me only the written Torah. So Shammai rebuked him, and he threw him out, and he kicked him out. Came before Hillel, and Hillel converted him. So the first day that he came before Hillel to convert, Hillel started saying, Aleph Beis Gimel Daled. The next day, Hillel started reading those same letters as Tav Shin Reish Kuf. He said, yesterday you said it to me was Aleph Beis Gimel Daled. Now you're saying to me something else. Hillel says, oh, I see you're relying upon me. Now also rely upon me when I say that we have to accept the oral law. So Hillel was saying, you cannot even know how to read anything. You can't even know how to read the text of the written law without the oral law. And so since in the end we are going to have to rely upon the oral law, so therefore we have to rely upon it completely. And we say, and we really, the written Torah can only be read with the accompaniment of our tradition, of our oral law. If you put into AI, if you write something into AI, say, give me the explanation of this verse, you have to say according to the oral law, because all the other readings of the verses are different from our tradition. And so therefore we reject them as informative to our faith and to our practice. All the whole concepts that we hold as like most dear to our faith, like for example, the Messiah, the coming of the Mashiach, or to tell us about the world to come, all of this is the oral law. But, says the Dudaei Reuven, all of the Torahs, these 2 Torahs that we're referring to, the written Torah and the oral Torah, all of them are hinted to. They're really just one Torah. And in fact, the written Torah does really hint to all of these laws. Meaning to say that we know the Talmud tells us in Reuven 21a that Rabbi Akiva was once sitting there and he was expounding all the letters, all the crowns of the Torah, and that's how all of these teachings were brought back to Moses at Sinai. So we have a general rule that everything in the written Torah, all the laws of the oral Torah could really be discovered in the written Torah. We just have to know how to find them. We just have to know how to find them. So basically, the written Torah contains the actual commandments, but also contains hints to what we know as the oral Torah. And that's what the Jewish people said when they received the Torah. Naaseh v'nishma. This is now we're coming to, I think, the first innovation in his exposition. Until now, the Dudaei Reuven was just expounding the different midrashim, but now he's giving us a chiddush, a new idea. He says, what does Naaseh v'nishma mean? We will do and we will listen. Listen to what he says. We will do. That refers to the written law. That refers to the actual commandments that we have to do. V'nishma, and we will listen, that means we're listening to the secrets of the Torah, the oral law, meaning to say the ones that you can't write, that they only gave to the Jewish people as a hint at Sinai. And that means to say that that's why God said, who revealed this secret to the Jewish people? What's the secret? The oral law are the secrets. That's the unique part of the relationship between God and the Jewish people, is the secrets of the oral law. The written Torah. The written Torah is there for everybody, but the oral law is the secret way in which it was expounded and accepted by the Jewish people. And we know that there are the 13 attributes in which we can expound the Torah, and that through these 13 attributes, you can discover all the laws of the Torah. That's what the Dudaei Reuven says, all the things that are hinted to. And that's what it means that when it says that God made a covenant with the Jewish people on account of the oral law, and he pointed out before that there was a contradiction, because what about what's in the covenant over the written law? So what it means is that God is saying to Moshe and to the Jewish people, I'm making the covenant with you in the written law, but it's through the way the written law is going to be expounded, through the oral law, through the principles of exposition. That's the only way that is appropriate to derive laws from the Torah, through these legal principles and through these laws. And he says, and he explains in this manner an incident that happened in Masechet Sofrim, that there was an incident with 5 elders. This is one of the most puzzling passages in the Torah, in the tradition, that there was the story of the Septuagint. There were 5 elders who wrote to Ptolemy the king the Torah in Greek. And the Talmud says that this was one of the most difficult days for the Jewish people, like the day of the golden calf, because they were unable to, the Torah should never have been translated. This was the time where the Torah was translated into Greek. And in fact, that's one of the reasons why we fast on the 10th of Teves. And the Torah writes that this is one of the reasons why we fast, because on the 10th of Teves, the Torah was translated into Greek. Or actually maybe on the 8th of Teves, and there were 3 days of darkness in the world as a result of that. And so what was the problem? Why was it such a problem that the Torah was translated into Greek? Because you're really allowed to write the Torah in every language, but that is the written Torah. What happened when they translated the Torah into Greek that day? There, they translated also the oral law, and they translated the ways to interpret the Torah and the drashos of the Torah, and those needed to remain the prize of the Jewish people. And so therefore, that's why this was a day that was so difficult, because we're of the concern that it really was unable to be translated. I'm just going to make this point. It couldn't be translated. It couldn't be done in that manner, because what was the way it had to be done? It had to be done in a manner of the tradition of being passed down. And I see your question. I'm just make this one point and then I'll come back to it. He says that's why when God gave the Torah to Moshe and he said there are 2 days and Moshe added another day, God agreed with him. And God didn't come down until they separated for 3 days. And that was to teach the Jewish people that the oral law is in fact the written Torah. Means that is really what God meant when he said 2 days. That you had to realize that God was saying 3 days. And that all of the ways to expound the Torah that the rabbis expounded, that was actually done. It's written in the code inside the text. And that's the foundation of the oral law. And God agreed with it. And God said that this is the foundation. So the basic idea, what the Dudaei Reuven is saying, I'll pause for a moment, is that the oral law is the code, is the secret way to read the Torah. And this is something which is the prize of the Jewish people. That was not supposed to be shared with the world. This is something that is being nurtured, and he's going to expound upon it to say that this is why it was begun with the women, because the mother was always the foundation of the household, and this was something that was handed down in the household through the nurturing and through the love. That was the oral law, and that was something that goes beyond the written Torah. The written Torah, the larger point of all those laws that were written down in a harsh manner, that's something that could be conveyed in the text, and anybody could read that. But the oral law, which is the secrets, like the family tunes, the family inside jokes, that had to be passed down through the mother in the nurturing manner inside the home. And that's the oral law. Let me just pause here for a moment. And so the Dudaei Reuven, I don't know if we're going to have time to go through it, but he starts going through all the midrashim that he cited. He said, what did when he said that Rav Yosef said, on the day of Shavuos, I made the calf, because he says there would have been many, were not for that day, there would have been many Yosef. I would be just another Yosef in the marketplace. So what's he saying? He's saying that day was the day which was specifically about the oral Torah, which is the faith in the Chachamim, Amunat Chachamim, the faith in the sages and the fulfillment of the whole Torah. That day that God agreed with Moses, and that day that God said, I'm not going to come down to show myself until the third day, to show that Moses was right in his explanation. And that's why Rav Yosef said, we're not for that day that Moshe added on his own. We're not for that specific day. I mean nothing, because all I am is a continuation of that tradition. And this is what the Dudaei Reuven writes, the Nisayon, and he says, through experience, we've seen through our exile and all the words of Israel that the decrees of the sages are what strengthened and supported the Jewish people, that we didn't get mixed up amongst the nations. And he praises the idea that we don't eat the bread and the wine and the oil of the nations of the world, because that's what kept us connected as a people, and we accepted with purity and the faith until this day. And that's why it states, and then it goes through the next one. This is why it states that the Jewish people stood underneath the mountain, and God said, if you accept the Torah, good, and otherwise, here will be your burial place. What does that mean? What does that mean? It means as follows, that if you will strengthen yourself with the fences and the guards and the protections that guarding the Jewish people, good. But if not, you won't be able to exist. All of your faith, you'll disappear. You will not be able to thrive and to grow as a people. And this is what it means. And now let's get to the verse that we started with. This is what it means. Thus you shall say to the house of Jacob, these are the women, and say to the children of Israel, these are the men. That Hashem Yisparach said to Moshe that he should teach the women and the house of Israel the written Torah and the laws, and then you shall speak to the children of Israel, the men, and that refers to the scholars. There you should teach them the oral law, that they know how to expound all the Torah, meaning to say, first teach the written law to the people who are not the scholars, and then say the written law to the oral law to the scholars, so that they can understand and they can teach it. And that's what it says, I will carry you on the wings of Nisharim, and I'll bring you to me. And that's the source of faith, meaning to say, if you expound the oral law, you'll be carried to me, and you'll be a treasure. And that will be what the differentiator between you and all the other nations of the world is. And then you will be for me the kingdom of priests, this Mamlecha Kohanim and the Goy Kadosh. You, the children of Israel, if you will be able to really truly understand the secrets of the oral law, then this is what will make you a kingdom of nations, and it will separate you from everybody else. And he says, and now I'm going to read the last two paragraphs that he writes, and I'm going to translate. It says, now let's conclude with the words of the Midrash that we began. Rabbi Yehuda says, Beit Yaakov, this is the Sanhedrin. Rabbi Yochanan said, Beit Yaakov, this is the Sanhedrin. So Rabbi Yochanan Doresh Acheret Midrash Rabbah now. Rabbi Yochanan expounded it differently. And he said that Beit Yaakov, this is the elders, the Sanhedrin, and Bnei Yisro are the youngers. And that's what he says. So say to the house of Jacob, to the elders, and say to the children of Israel, the young ones, that you shall be the kingdom of priests. Venerally, he says, the elders of the generation, Mabitim she'ikarei haTorah v'mitzvah, the elders of the generation, they look and they think that the essence of the Torah and the commandments will guard the Jewish people and the customs of Judaism and the education of children. But they don't pay attention to the external factors. But the younger ones, they also want that everything should be with the Jewish people acting in order, and they also desire that there should be a kingdom with a nation with the Jewish people, and that they shall have amongst them a nation and a land and all of its forces. It's a very Zionist message. Therefore God said to Moshe, thus you shall say to the house of Jacob, this is the Sanhedrin and the elders who want through Yiras Hashem Torah mitzvos. And he should say to them, you saw that which I did to Egypt. And now if you listen to my voice and you guard my covenant and you're for me a segula, a treasure, then the younger people will want to be part of it and they'll want to arrange it. And that I also agree. But not like the nations of the world. You shall be for me a mamlechet kohanim and goy kadosh, meaning to say, you have to speak. The elders of the generation are required to speak to the younger generation. Yes, you can be like all the other. You can can accept the oral Torah, but then you cannot be like the other nations in the world. And the only way you could be the mamlechet kohanim and the goy kadosh is only if you separate yourselves from the other nations of the world through your acceptance of the oral Torah. And this was his message he was saying this message, the Zionistic message in the 1950s, and he saw that the younger generation, they wanted to build up the nation of Israel, and they wanted to build it up, and he said the only way you can be true Mamlechet Kohanim and Goy Kadosh is if you build it up through the oral Torah. The oral Torah is what kept the Jewish people through the centuries, through our acceptance of the sages, through the teachings of the sages, through the addition to the written Torah. And that's why everybody talks about the 10 Commandments, but what he was arguing here is it's not the 10 Commandments that kept the Jewish people connected to Hashem, it's the oral interpretation of the 10 Commandments. Anyway, that is the beautiful Dvar Torah of the Dudaei Reuven, and I'm happy to take questions about it.